The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Sarah Chun walked through the military base's main corridor, her civilian contractor badge bouncing slightly against her chest. To anyone watching, she looked like just another tech support specialist making her rounds. Her black-rimmed glasses, pulled-back hair, and standard-issue polo shirt completed the picture of a quiet IT professional who preferred keyboards to combat zones. But appearances could be deceiving. Sarah had been working at Fort Braxton for 3 months now, maintaining the base's computer networks and staying carefully under the radar. The other contractors treated her politely, but distantly, assuming she was just another desk jockey who'd never seen real action. The soldiers were even more dismissive, barely acknowledging her presence when she came to fix their computers or update their systems. She preferred it that way. The less attention she drew, the better. The call had come in 20 minutes ago. Major Rodriguez's voice had been clipped and urgent over the radio. We need tech support in Armory Building C immediately. Systems completely down, and we've got an inspection in 2 hours. Sarah grabbed her toolkit and headed out, her soft-soled shoes making barely a whisper against the polished floors. Building C sat at the far edge of the base, a squat concrete structure that housed some of the military's most sensitive equipment. She'd only been there twice before, both times for routine maintenance. The autumn wind caught her as she stepped outside, and she pulled her light jacket tighter. The base was quieter than usual today, most personnel either in training exercises or preparing for the upcoming inspection. She could see groups of soldiers in the distance, running through drills with mechanical precision. As she approached Building C, Sarah noticed something odd. The usual guards weren't at their posts. The heavy steel door stood slightly ajar, which violated every security protocol she knew. Her instincts, honed by years of training she tried hard to forget, immediately went on alert. She paused at the entrance, listening carefully. Voices carried from inside, but they didn't sound like the usual military personnel she was used to working with. These voices were rougher, more urgent, and speaking in hushed tones that suggested they didn't want to be overheard. Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward her hip, where she used to carry a sidearm. Finding nothing but empty air, she reminded herself she was just a contractor now, just a tech support specialist. Whatever was happening inside wasn't her concern. But as she turned to leave and report the irregularity, a woman's scream pierced the air from inside the building. Every muscle in Sarah's body tensed. Her civilian contractor persona warred with something deeper, something she'd spent 3 months trying to suppress. The scream came again, followed by harsh male laughter and the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, weighing her options. She could walk away, call for security, and let the proper authorities handle whatever was happening inside. That would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. Instead, she found herself pushing the door open and stepping inside. The Armory's main corridor was dimly lit, emergency lighting casting long shadows between the weapon storage units. Sarah moved silently, her body automatically falling into movement patterns she'd learned years ago in places she wasn't supposed to talk about. The voices were coming from the main storage area deeper in the building. As she got closer, she could make out at least 3 distinct male voices and 1 female voice that sounded increasingly distressed. "Come on, sweetheart, just tell us where they keep the good stuff," one of the men was saying. "We know there's more than just rifles in here. Word is they've got some serious hardware stored in the back rooms." "I don't know what you're talking about," the woman replied. Sarah recognized the voice now. It belonged to Lieutenant Jennifer Walsh, one of the Armory's regular staff. "This is just basic infantry equipment. Nothing special. Don't lie to us," another male voice growled. "We've been watching this place for weeks. We know they rotate the high-value items through here. Night vision, body armor, maybe even some of those fancy communication systems." Sarah reached the corner where the main corridor opened into the storage area. Peering around carefully, she could see the situation clearly now. 3 men in civilian clothes had Lieutenant Walsh backed against a wall of weapon lockers. They weren't military. Their posture, their movements, Their complete disregard for proper handling procedures around the weapons made that obvious. The leader was a tall, thin man with a scraggly beard and nervous energy. He kept pacing back and forth while the other two flanked Walsh. One was short and stocky with tattoos covering his arms. The other was medium height but built like a linebacker. "Look," the tall one continued, "we're not here to hurt anyone. We just need to make some quick cash, and military hardware sells real good on the black market. You help us out, we'll be gone in an hour, and nobody needs to get hurt." Lieutenant Walsh's face was pale but determined. "Even if I wanted to help you, I don't have access to anything beyond standard issue equipment. The valuable items you're talking about are stored in different facilities with much higher security clearance." The stocky man with tattoos laughed harshly. "That's what they all say. But we've done our homework. We know this Armory processes transfers for the whole base. There's got to be good stuff here somewhere." Sarah assessed the situation quickly. 3 civilians, probably local criminals who'd gotten wind of military equipment somehow. They were armed. She could see pistols and shoulder holsters on 2 of them, and the third had a knife visible on his belt. They'd somehow gotten past base security, which meant they either had inside information or had taken advantage of the reduced guard presence during today's training exercises. Lieutenant Walsh was clearly scared but holding it together. She was a logistics specialist, not trained for combat situations like this. If these men decided to escalate beyond threats, she wouldn't be able to defend herself effectively. Sarah looked down at her civilian contractor outfit and sighed quietly. 3 months of peaceful anonymity were about to come to an end. She stepped around the corner into the storage area, making sure her footsteps were audible so she wouldn't startle anyone into making a bad decision. "Excuse me," she said in her best nervous civilian voice. "I'm here for the computer maintenance. I got a call about system problems." All 4 people turned to look at her. The 3 men immediately tensed, hands moving toward their weapons. Lieutenant Walsh's eyes went wide with a mixture of hope and fear. Hope that help had arrived, fear that Sarah was about to become another victim. "Who the hell are you?" the tall leader demanded, his hand resting on his pistol grip. Sarah pushed her glasses up her nose with a shaking finger and clutched her toolkit tighter. "I'm Sarah Chun, tech support contractor. I got a call about computer problems in this building. I can come back later if this is a bad time." The linebacker-built man laughed. "This just keeps getting better. Now we've got 2 hostages. Actually," the leader said thoughtfully, "this might work out even better. A contractor might have access codes or knowledge about security systems that our friend here doesn't have." He gestured toward Lieutenant Walsh. Sarah took a small step backward, playing up the scared civilian act. "I really don't know anything about security systems. I just fix computers when they break. Maybe I should go call someone." "Nobody's going anywhere," the stocky tattooed man said, pulling his pistol halfway out of its holster. "You're staying right here until we get what we came for." "Please," Sarah said, her voice cracking slightly, "I don't want any trouble. I just want to do my job and go home to my cat." The 3 men exchanged glances, clearly debating how to handle this new complication. Lieutenant Walsh caught Sarah's eye and mouthed, "I'm sorry," silently. Sarah gave the slightest nod in return, then did something that would have seemed completely natural to anyone watching. She stumbled slightly while backing up, dropping her heavy toolkit. The crash as it hit the concrete floor made everyone jump, and in that moment of distraction, Sarah's entire demeanor changed. The scared civilian mask didn't disappear completely, but something predatory flickered behind her glasses as she quickly assessed distances, angles, and threat priorities. Her body language shifted almost imperceptibly, weight balanced differently, hands positioned for quick movement rather than defensive cowering. But the moment passed quickly, and she was back to playing the frightened contractor, scrambling to pick up scattered tools from her kit. Sorry, she mumbled. "I'm really clumsy when I'm nervous. Please don't hurt us. I'll cooperate however I can." The leader seemed satisfied with her submissive response. "Smart girl. Now, both of you ladies are going to help us find what we're looking for, or this situation is going to get a lot more unpleasant for everyone." As Sarah knelt, gathering her tools, she was actually conducting a detailed tactical assessment of the room. The armory was laid out in a grid pattern with weapon storage lockers creating multiple corridors and potential cover positions. There were 3 exits: the main door they'd all come through, an emergency exit at the far end, and a side door that led to the administrative offices. The lighting was adequate, but not ideal, with several shadowy areas that could be used for concealment. The weapon lockers were made of heavy steel that would stop most small arms fire. The floor was concrete with no loose objects except for her scattered tools, which actually worked in her favor. Most importantly, she noted that while the 3 men were armed, they were holding their weapons casually, not maintaining proper tactical readiness. They were criminals, not soldiers, and their confidence was based on intimidation rather than training. All right, the leader continued. Let's start with the computers. Tech girl, you're going to show us how to access the inventory systems. I want to know everything that's been processed through this facility in the past month. Sarah stood up slowly, toolkit in hand. The computers are in the administrative section. Through that door over there. She pointed toward the side exit she'd identified. Good. We'll all go together. And, ladies, just remember, we're not here to hurt anyone, but we will if we have to. Don't give us a reason. As the group began moving toward the administrative section, Sarah noticed Lieutenant Walsh was walking stiffly, favoring her left ankle. When she'd heard that first scream, someone had clearly gotten physical with the lieutenant, probably when she'd initially tried to resist or call for help. The administrative section was smaller and more cramped than the main storage area, with 3 computer workstations and several filing cabinets. Sarah sat down at the main terminal and began typing, her fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. It's going to take a few minutes to access the inventory database, she said. The security protocols are pretty complex. In reality, she was using her legitimate access codes to pull up the system, but she was also activating several hidden subroutines she'd built into the network during her 3 months of maintenance work. Old habits died hard, and she'd never been able to resist creating backdoors and emergency protocols, even in systems she was only supposed to fix. How much longer? The stocky man asked impatiently. Almost there, Sarah replied, typing steadily. What she was actually doing was activating a silent alarm system that would alert base security to unauthorized access in the armory. She was also copying the security camera feeds to an external server and beginning a trace on how these men had gained access to the facility in the first place. But most importantly, she was buying time to plan her next move. The 3 criminals were standing behind her, looking over her shoulder at the screen. Lieutenant Walsh was sitting in a chair near the door, still favoring her injured ankle. The positioning wasn't ideal for what Sarah had in mind, but it would have to do. There we go, she said as the inventory database finally loaded on screen. This shows everything that's been processed through the armory in the past 30 days. The leader leaned in closer to read the screen. What's all this technical stuff? Translated into English. Sarah began scrolling through the entries, explaining in simple terms what various pieces of equipment were and where they were currently located. As she talked, she was mentally counting down the time until base security would receive her silent alert and respond. But she was also watching the 3 men carefully, looking for the moment when their attention would be focused entirely on the computer screen and away from their hostages. Hold up, the linebacker said suddenly. Go back to that entry, the one about night vision equipment. Sarah scrolled back up the list. This one? It shows a shipment of N/PVS 14 night vision binoculars that came through last week. Where are they now? The leader asked eagerly. According to this, they were transferred to Building F for distribution to units deploying overseas. Damn, the tattooed man muttered. That's clear across the base. Too much security. What about this one? The leader pointed to another entry. Advanced tactical communications gear? Sarah checked the details. That's still here. Locked storage unit 47C in the main armory area. Now we're talking. How do we get into that unit? I need Lieutenant Walsh's access codes, Sarah said, glancing over at the injured woman. Storage units require dual authorization, my technical access, and her inventory management codes. The leader turned to Walsh. You hear that, sweetheart? Time to be cooperative. Lieutenant Walsh straightened up despite her obvious pain. I won't help you steal military equipment. These systems are in place to protect American soldiers. The stocky man took a step toward her, his hand moving to his knife. Maybe you need some more convincing. That was the moment Sarah had been waiting for. All three men were focused on Lieutenant Walsh, their attention diverted from the supposedly harmless tech contractor sitting at the computer. Sarah's transformation from nervous civilian to lethal operator was instantaneous and complete. She spun in her chair and launched herself at the nearest threat, the tattooed man who was reaching for his knife. Her movement was fluid and precise, driven by muscle memory that had been drilled into her through countless hours of training in places that officially didn't exist. Her shoulder drove into his midsection, doubling him over and driving the breath from his lungs. Before he could recover, her elbow came up and caught him in the throat, dropping him to the floor, gasping for air. The linebacker turned toward the sudden commotion, his hand going for his pistol, but Sarah was already moving. She grabbed a heavy stapler from a desk and hurled it with lethal accuracy. It struck him in the temple with enough force to send him stumbling sideways into the wall, dazed and disoriented. The leader was the most dangerous threat. He was the furthest away and had the best angle to draw his weapon. Sarah dove behind one of the computer desks as his pistol cleared leather, the sound of his first shot deafeningly loud in the confined space. "What the hell?" he shouted, confusion and anger making his voice crack. "You said you were just a tech support contractor." Sarah's voice, when it came from behind the desk, was completely different from the nervous, civilian tone she'd been using. It was calm, controlled, and carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to life and death situations. "I lied." The leader's second shot splintered the wooden edge of the desk Sarah was using for cover. She could hear him moving, trying to get a better angle, while keeping his distance from her position. Smart man. He'd just seen her take down 2 armed criminals in less than 5 seconds, and he wasn't about to underestimate her again. "Lieutenant Walsh," Sarah called out, her voice steady despite the gunfire. "Are you injured beyond the ankle?" "No," Walsh replied from her position near the door. "Just shaken up." "Good. When I give the signal, I want you to get out of this room and head for the main entrance. Security should be responding to my silent alarm any minute now." The leader let out a harsh laugh. "Silent alarm? Lady, I don't know who you think you are, but we jammed all communications in and out of this building before we came in. Nobody's coming to help you." Sarah processed this information quickly. It explained how they'd gotten past the guards and into the building without triggering immediate response. These men were better organized than she'd initially given them credit for. But it also meant she was on her own until she could either neutralize the threat or find a way to get word to the outside. She could hear the tattooed man she'd hit first starting to recover, his breathing becoming more regular. The linebacker was still against the wall, but beginning to shake off the effects of his head injury. She needed to move before the odds shifted back in their favor. "You want to know who I am?" Sarah asked, buying herself a few more seconds to plan her next move. "Fair enough. My name is Sarah Chun, and until 8 months ago, I was a combat systems technician with the Army's 75th Ranger Regiment." The silence that followed was telling. Even criminals knew enough about the military to understand that Rangers weren't ordinary soldiers. "But that's not the whole story," she continued, checking her watch and calculating response times. "Before that, I spent 3 years with Delta Force as a technical specialist. Do you know what that means?" Another pause. The leader's voice, when it came, was noticeably less confident than before. "You're lying. Women don't serve in Delta. Officially, you're correct. But unofficially, when you need someone who can infiltrate enemy positions, hack their computer systems, and eliminate targets without anyone knowing you were ever there, gender becomes irrelevant. Skills are what matter." Sarah was telling the truth. Mostly, she had indeed served with both units, though the details of her service remained classified at levels that most people would never know existed. Her official military records showed her as a communications specialist who'd served honorably and received a medical discharge after an injury during a training exercise. The real story was much more complicated. So here's what's going to happen, Sarah continued, slowly shifting her position behind the desk. You're going to put your weapon down, and we're all going to walk out of here quietly. Your friends need medical attention, and you need to reconsider your career choices. Like hell, the leader snarled, but she could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Even if you're some kind of super soldier, I've still got the gun and the better position. Do you? Sarah asked mildly. That was when the lights went out. The computer workstations had backup power supplies, but the main lighting circuit was controlled by a switch near the door, a switch that Lieutenant Walsh had quietly reached while the leader was focused on his conversation with Sarah. In the sudden darkness, Sarah moved with the fluid precision of someone who'd been trained to fight in conditions far worse than a dimly lit office. She could see the muzzle flash as the leader fired blindly in her direction, but she was no longer where he thought she was. She'd rolled left and come up behind the filing cabinets, using the ambient light from the computer screens to navigate while staying in the deepest shadows. Her soft-soled shoes made no sound on the concrete floor as she began to circle toward the leader's position. "Turn the lights back on," he shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "I don't think so," Sarah replied, but her voice came from a completely different direction than where he'd been shooting. "You want to know what Delta training teaches you? First lesson, control the battlefield. Darkness is just another tool." The leader fired twice more, but he was shooting at sounds and shadows now. Sarah could tell by his muzzle flashes that he was backing toward the wall, trying to get something solid behind him. It was a good instinct, but it also limited his mobility and made him predictable. The tattooed man was back on his feet, but clearly disoriented, feeling around in the darkness and making enough noise to wake the dead. The linebacker was still slumped against the wall, conscious, but not yet ready to rejoin the fight. Sarah reached into her toolkit and pulled out a handful of cable ties, standard equipment for any IT professional, but also surprisingly useful restraints in the right circumstances. She also grabbed her small LED flashlight, holding it away from her body as she activated it briefly. The beam caught the leader square in the eyes, destroying his night vision and causing him to fire reflexively at the light source. But Sarah was already moving, having dropped and rolled the moment she turned on the flashlight. She came up behind the tattooed man, who was still stumbling around, trying to locate his dropped knife. The cable tie went around his wrists with practiced efficiency, tight enough to cut off circulation if he struggled too hard. "One down," she announced calmly. The leader spun toward her voice, but she'd already moved again. His shot went wide, and she could hear him cursing as he tried to track her movement. "You know what else Delta teaches?" Sarah continued conversationally. "Psychological warfare. Right now you're thinking about how many rounds you have left. Standard magazine capacity is 15 rounds for most pistols. You fired 6 shots, so you've got 9 left, maybe 10 if you topped off the magazine. Another shot, this one even wilder than the last. 7 shots," Sarah corrected. "But you're not thinking clearly anymore, are you? You're jumping at shadows, firing at sounds, wasting ammunition on an enemy who's controlling every aspect of this engagement." She was behind the last row of filing cabinets now, close enough to hear his heavy breathing. The linebacker was starting to move, shaking his head and trying to focus, but he was still several minutes away from being combat effective. "Here's what you don't understand," Sarah continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "I don't want to kill you. Killing you would create paperwork, investigations, questions I don't want to answer. But I will absolutely kill you if you force me to." The leader's voice cracked slightly when he replied. "What do you want?" "I want you to drop your weapon and surrender. I want your friends to get medical attention for their injuries. And I want to go back to my nice, quiet job fixing computers and pretending I never learned how to kill people in 47 different ways." "How do I know you won't kill us anyway?" Sarah sighed audibly. "Because if I wanted you dead, you'd already be dead. I had at least 3 opportunities to take lethal shots while we've been talking. I chose non-lethal takedowns because I hoped you'd be smart enough to recognize when you're outmatched. The linebacker finally managed to stand up, swaying slightly, but reaching for his holstered pistol. Sarah's flashlight beam caught him in the act, and her voice turned sharp with command authority. Don't. You're concussed, and your reaction time is compromised. Reaching for that weapon will force me to treat you as a lethal threat. Something in her tone must have gotten through to him, because his hand stopped halfway to his holster. Smart choice, Sarah said. Now, let me tell you a story while your boss decides whether he wants to end this sensibly or stupidly. She kept moving as she talked, never staying in one position long enough for the leader to draw a bead on her voice. 8 months ago, I was in Syria. Officially, I wasn't there, of course. Officially, no American forces were conducting operations in that particular region. But unofficially, there was a terrorist cell that had gotten hold of some very advanced encryption technology, and someone needed to go in and retrieve it. The leader was turning in slow circles now, trying to track her movement, but the acoustics of the room made it impossible to pinpoint her location. The mission was supposed to be simple. Get in, hack their computers, download the encryption keys, get out. Nobody was supposed to get hurt. But intelligence was wrong about how many hostiles were in the compound. Sarah paused in her movement, letting the silence stretch. I spent 18 hours in a building very much like this one, except it was full of people who really wanted to kill me. By the time backup arrived, I'd eliminated 14 enemy combatants and retrieved the intelligence. But I'd also discovered something I wasn't supposed to know. Another pause, longer this time. The encryption technology? It was American-made. Someone in our own government had been selling advanced military communications gear to terrorist organizations. When I tried to report it through proper channels, I was told to forget what I'd seen and accept a medical discharge with full honors. The leader's breathing had become more controlled, and Sarah could tell he was trying to use her story as a distraction while he repositioned. She let him think it was working. So I took the discharge, changed my name, got a civilian contractor job, and tried to disappear into a normal life. I've spent the last 8 months fixing computers and pretending I don't wake up every morning wondering if today is the day someone decides I know too much. She was directly behind him now, close enough to reach out and touch him, but he had no idea she was there. The point of this story, she continued, her voice now coming from directly behind his left ear, is that I've already lost everything that mattered to me. My career, my identity, my future. So ask yourself, what exactly do you think you can threaten me with? The leader spun around, but Sarah had anticipated the movement. Her hand closed over his gun hand, controlling the weapon's direction, while her other hand found the pressure point at the base of his neck. He went limp immediately, the pistol clattering to the floor. And that's how you end a hostage situation without anyone dying, Sarah said, more to herself than to anyone else. She quickly secured the leader with cable ties, then checked on the other two. The tattooed man was conscious but subdued, his hands already restrained. The linebacker was still wobbly from his head injury, but coherent enough to follow simple instructions. Lieutenant Walsh, are you okay? Sarah called out. I'm fine, Walsh replied, her voice shaky but determined. What about their communications jamming? Sarah smiled grimly as she gathered the dropped weapons. That's the beautiful thing about being a real tech specialist. I know exactly where to look for jamming equipment, and I know exactly how to disable it. She found the jamming device in a backpack near the main entrance. A commercial-grade signal blocker that was effective but far from military standard. It took her less than 2 minutes to shut it down and restore normal communications to the building. As soon as her phone showed signal bars, she speed-dialed base security. This is Contractor Chun in Armory Building C. I need immediate medical response and security teams. 3 civilian intruders are secured and ready for pickup. 1 friendly casualty with minor injuries. The response was immediate and professional. Copy that, Contractor Chun. Teams are inbound. Are you in immediate danger? Negative. Situation is contained. But You might want to have someone investigate how these individuals got past perimeter security. They were better prepared than your average criminals. As they waited for the response teams, Sarah helped Lieutenant Walsh to a more comfortable position and did a quick medical assessment of the three intruders. None of their injuries were life-threatening, though the tattooed man would need attention for his throat injury, and the linebacker would require monitoring for concussion symptoms. So, Walsh said quietly, "Rangers and Delta Force?" Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Why are you working as a civilian contractor?" "Long story," Sarah replied. "Let's just say that sometimes serving your country means knowing when to stop serving your country." Walsh studied her for a moment. "Will you get in trouble for this? For using force against civilians?" "Probably. There'll be an investigation, questions about my background, people wondering why a tech support contractor knows advanced hand-to-hand combat techniques. My quiet life just got a lot more complicated." "I'm sorry," Walsh said sincerely. "If you hadn't been here, these men would have gotten away with whatever they were planning. I owe you my life." Sarah shrugged. "You don't owe me anything. I just did what needed to be done." But even as she said it, she could feel the familiar weight of her old life settling back onto her shoulders. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the cold calculation of someone who'd spent too many years in the shadows. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder, and Sarah knew her 8 months of peaceful anonymity were about to end forever. The first security team through the door moved with the precise coordination of well-trained soldiers, weapons ready, and eyes scanning for threats. Sarah remained perfectly still with her hands visible, knowing that sudden movements around armed personnel could end badly for everyone involved. "Contractor Chun," the team leader asked, his voice professionally neutral. "That's me." 3 subjects secured, weapons collected, and placed on the desk. No outstanding threats. Sarah gestured toward the pile of confiscated firearms. "Lieutenant Walsh has minor injuries and will need medical evaluation." The team spread out to secure the scene while medics attended to the injured. Sarah watched them work, noting their efficiency and professionalism. These were good soldiers, well-trained and disciplined. She found herself automatically cataloging their equipment, tactics, and positioning old habits that she couldn't quite suppress. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with us for debriefing," the team leader said. His name tape read Harrison, and his bearing suggested he was probably a senior NCO. "Of course," Sarah replied. "Will Lieutenant Walsh be okay? The medics will take good care of her. Right now, I need to focus on understanding what happened here." Sarah nodded and allowed herself to be escorted from the building. As they walked toward the security office, she could see the base coming alive with activity. Word of the incident was clearly spreading, and she caught sight of several officers heading toward the Armory complex. The debriefing room was exactly what she'd expected: windowless, sterile, with a metal table and uncomfortable chairs. Harrison gestured for her to sit while he activated a recording device. "This interview is being conducted at 1,347 hours on October 15th. He began formally. "I am Staff Sergeant Harrison, conducting a preliminary incident report interview with civilian contractor Sarah Chun regarding the security incident in Armory Building C." For the next hour, Sarah provided a detailed account of the events, sticking as closely to the truth as possible while downplaying her own capabilities. She described hearing Lieutenant Walsh's scream, entering the building to investigate, and being taken hostage along with the lieutenant. "And then what happened?" Harrison asked when she reached the point where the lights went out. "The situation became chaotic. The subjects were arguing among themselves. Lieutenant Walsh managed to turn off the lights, and I was able to help restrain them during the confusion." Harrison looked skeptical. "Help restrain them? These were 3 armed men, and you're saying you helped subdue them in the dark?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I have some basic self-defense training, and they were more concerned with each other than with me once things started going wrong." "What kind of self-defense training?" "Standard military combatives. I served 4 years as a communications specialist before my discharge." It wasn't technically a lie. She had served as a communications specialist, among other things. The fact that her communications work had involved infiltrating enemy positions and coordinating special operations raids was something her security clearance prevented her from discussing. Harrison made notes in his file. We'll need to verify your service record and civilian contractor credentials. In the meantime, I need you to remain available for follow-up interviews. Of course. Am I under arrest? No, ma'am. You're being treated as a victim and witness at this time. But this incident will require a full investigation, especially given the security implications. Sarah was released with instructions to report to the base commander's office the following morning. She returned to her small apartment off base, knowing that her phone would be ringing very soon. She wasn't disappointed. The call came at 2,130 hours. Chun. She answered without checking the caller ID, though she already knew who it would be. Hello, Sarah. The voice belonged to Colonel James Mitchell, though he'd never officially told her his rank or real name. Interesting day at work? I've had better. I imagine you have. We need to talk. No, we don't. I'm retired, remember? Medical discharge, full honors, and a very clear understanding that my service record stays buried. That was before you decided to play action hero in a military armory. Did you really think you could use those skills and not attract attention? Sarah sat down heavily on her couch. What was I supposed to do? Let them kill Lieutenant Walsh and steal military weapons? You were supposed to call for help and let the proper authorities handle it. That's what civilians do. The proper authorities were 15 minutes away, and Walsh would have been dead in 5. You trained me to make tactical decisions based on available resources and acceptable risk. I made the call. There was a long pause before Mitchell replied. The base commander is asking questions about you. Specifically, he's asking why a tech support contractor knows advanced combat techniques and tactical planning. What did you tell him? Nothing yet. But that conversation is scheduled for tomorrow morning, right after your meeting with him. He's not stupid, Sarah. He knows there's more to you than your official record shows. Sarah closed her eyes and rubbed her temples. She'd known this day would come eventually. People with her training and background couldn't stay hidden forever, especially when they started using their skills in public. What do you want from me? She asked. The same thing we've always wanted. Your expertise, your skills, your willingness to do what others can't or won't do. I told you 8 months ago, I'm done. What I saw in Syria, what I learned about our own people selling weapons to terrorists, that was enough for me. The situation has changed. Ow! Mitchell's voice became more serious. Those 3 men who broke into the armory weren't just random criminals looking for weapons to sell. They were working for someone with detailed knowledge of base security protocols and weapon storage procedures. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. You think they had inside help? I think they were part of something much bigger than a simple theft operation. The jamming equipment they used was commercial grade, but modified with military-spec components. Their knowledge of the base layout was too detailed for casual observation, and the timing of their operation, during a scheduled training exercise when security was reduced, suggests inside intelligence. So investigate it. Use your regular channels. We can't. If there is a mole inside the base, any official investigation could alert them and drive the operation deeper underground. We need someone who can investigate without official sanction, someone who can move freely through the base infrastructure without attracting attention. Someone like a civilian tech contractor who already has access to computer systems and maintenance areas. Exactly. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering her options. She'd walked away from this world for good reasons, but those reasons hadn't included the possibility that her old life would follow her into her new one. If I say yes, what kind of operation are we talking about? Low-profile intelligence gathering. Use your access to trace how those men got their information. Find out who's been feeding them details about security protocols and weapon movements. Once we identify the leak, regular security can take over. And if I say no, then tomorrow morning you explain to a full-bird colonel how a tech support contractor managed to single-handedly neutralize 3 armed intruders without getting a scratch. You answer questions about your background, your training, and your service record. And then you probably spend the next several years dealing with congressional investigations into contractor background screening procedures. Sarah laughed humorlessly. So it's blackmail. It's reality. You're already involved, whether you want to be or not. The only question is whether you want to control the situation or let it control you. The line went quiet while Sarah considered her options. She could refuse, stick to her story about basic self-defense training, and hope that the investigation didn't dig too deep into her classified background. But Mitchell was right. She'd already exposed herself by taking action in the Armory. Questions would be asked, and those questions would eventually lead to uncomfortable answers. "What kind of timeline are we talking about?" she asked finally. "The base commander wants answers within 2 weeks. After that, he'll have no choice but to bring in outside investigators. 2 weeks to identify a mole who's been operating undetected for who knows how long. You've done more with less time and fewer resources." That was true. Some of her best work had been accomplished under impossible deadlines with minimal support. But those operations had been conducted by someone who believed in the mission and trusted the people giving orders. "I'll need operational autonomy," she said. "No micromanagement, no second-guessing my methods, and no interference from regular security personnel." "Agreed. And when this is over, I disappear again. New identity, new location, and a guarantee that this conversation never happened." "Done." Sarah stared out her apartment window at the base lights in the distance. 8 months of peaceful civilian life, over in a single afternoon. "Send me everything you have on the 3 suspects and the security breach. I'll start tomorrow after my meeting with the base commander." "It's already in your encrypted email." Of course it was. Mitchell had been planning this conversation from the moment the first reports of the Armory incident reached his desk. "One more thing," Sarah said. "If I find out you orchestrated this whole situation to get me back in the field, I'll disappear so completely that not even you'll be able to find me." "The thought never crossed my mind," Mitchell replied, but she could hear the smile in his voice. After hanging up, Sarah opened her laptop and accessed the encrypted email account she'd hoped never to use again. The files Mitchell had sent were comprehensive: background checks on the 3 suspects, security camera footage from the past month, and detailed analysis of the jamming equipment they'd used. She spent the next 3 hours reviewing the information, building psychological profiles, and looking for patterns. By the time she went to bed, she already had several theories about how the operation had been planned and executed. But more importantly, she had questions. Questions that suggested Mitchell was right about this being more than a simple theft attempt. The 3 suspects, Marcus Webb, Derek Torres, and Jimmy Patterson, had no apparent connection to each other prior to 6 weeks ago. Webb was a small-time con artist from Atlanta. Torres was a former auto mechanic with a gambling problem, and Patterson was an ex-bouncer with multiple assault convictions. None of them had military experience or technical training that would explain their detailed knowledge of base security procedures. Yet someone had recruited them, trained them, and equipped them for a sophisticated operation against a military target. Someone with access to inside information and resources. Someone who was still out there, probably already planning their next move. Sarah closed the laptop and tried to sleep, but her mind kept returning to the same uncomfortable thought. 8 months ago, she'd walked away from this world because she discovered that the people she trusted were selling weapons to enemies of the United States. Now she was back, investigating another weapons theft operation with potential inside connections. The coincidence was either remarkable or terrifying, and Sarah had stopped believing in coincidences a long time ago. Colonel William Hayes was exactly what Sarah expected from a base commander. Ramrod straight posture, crisp uniform, and the kind of steady gaze that suggested he'd seen enough combat to know the difference between real soldiers and pretenders. His office was spartanly decorated with unit citations, family photos, and a single flag case containing what was probably his father's burial flag. Sarah sat across from his desk, wearing her best civilian professional outfit, and maintaining the nervous contractor persona that had served her well for 8 months. "Ms. Chun," Hayes began, reviewing a file that was considerably thicker than it should have been for a routine contractor. I've read the incident report from yesterday, and I have to say, your actions were quite remarkable. Thank you, sir. I just did what I thought was right. 3 armed men, subdued by a tech support contractor with basic self-defense training. In the dark, no less. His tone suggested he found this explanation less than convincing. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I got lucky, sir. They weren't expecting resistance from a civilian, and Lieutenant Walsh's quick thinking with the lights gave me the opportunity one needed. Hayes leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. I've been commanding troops for 22 years, Ms. Chun. I've seen what luck looks like in combat situations, and I've seen what training looks like. What happened in that armory yesterday wasn't luck. Sarah remained quiet, letting him continue. So, I did some digging into your background. According to your official record, you served 4 years as a communications specialist with the 25th Infantry Division before receiving a medical discharge following a training accident. That's correct, sir. Clean record, commendable service, no disciplinary actions. But here's what's interesting. There are gaps in your deployment records that don't quite add up. Periods where you were supposedly on leave or training, but no one seems to remember exactly where. Sarah's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. I'm sorry, sir. I don't understand what you're getting at. Hayes opened another file. I also called some contacts at Fort Campbell. Funny thing, nobody there remembers a communications specialist named Sarah Chun. They remember someone by that name, but their description of her duties and capabilities doesn't match someone who spent 4 years fixing radios. The trap was closing, and Sarah could feel the walls of her civilian life crumbling around her. But before she could respond, there was a knock on Hayes' door. Enter, he called. Colonel Mitchell walked in, wearing a dress uniform Sarah had never seen before. His bearing and decorations made it clear he was senior to Hayes, and the expression on the base commander's face suggested this visit wasn't entirely welcome. Colonel Hayes, I apologize for interrupting, but I need to speak with Ms. Chun about a matter of national security. Hayes looked back and forth between them. Colonel Mitchell, I was just discussing Ms. Chun's background with her. Perhaps you could help clarify some discrepancies in her service record. I'm afraid that won't be possible. Ms. Chun's actual service record is class. What I can tell you is that she served her country with distinction in capacities that officially never existed. Sarah watched the interplay between the two officers, recognizing the careful dance of military politics and security protocols. Hayes clearly wanted answers, but Mitchell's authority in matters of classified operations gave him significant leverage. So what you're telling me, Hayes said carefully, is that I have a civilian contractor on my base whose real background is so classified that I can't even know what it is? What I'm telling you is that Ms. Chun is a patriot who sacrificed a great deal in service to her country and who has earned the right to pursue a quiet civilian life without harassment about her past. Hayes turned his attention back to Sarah. Is that what you want? A quiet civilian life? Sarah met his gaze directly. It was, sir, until yesterday. And now? Sarah glanced at Mitchell, who nodded slightly. Now I think there are some questions that need answers. Questions about how 3 civilians got detailed intelligence about base security protocols and weapon storage procedures. Hayes leaned forward. You think yesterday's incident was more than a simple theft attempt. I think someone with inside access provided those men with information they couldn't have obtained through casual observation. I think their operation was too sophisticated for random criminals, and I think whoever recruited them is still out there planning their next move. And you want to investigate this theory? With your permission, sir, I'd like to use my access as a civilian contractor to conduct some discreet inquiries. Nothing that would interfere with official security investigations, but perhaps I could identify leads that might otherwise be missed. Hayes considered this for a long moment. Colonel Mitchell, is this your idea? Ms. Chin's offer is entirely voluntary, sir. But given her unique qualifications and her existing access to base infrastructure, she may be able to investigate angles that would be difficult for regular security personnel to pursue. And if she uncovers evidence of insider involvement, then we'll have actionable intelligence that can be turned over to appropriate authorities. Hayes turned back to Sarah. What do you need from me? Just permission to continue my regular duties as a contractor, with perhaps expanded access to maintenance areas that might provide useful vantage points for observation. And if you're discovered conducting unauthorized surveillance, then you can honestly say you had no knowledge of my activities beyond approving routine contractor access. Hayes smiled grimly. Plausible deniability. I should have known. He stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the base he commanded. Ms. Chun, I've been responsible for the security of this installation for 2 years. The idea that someone under my command might be selling information to criminals is personally offensive to me. I understand, sir. So you have my unofficial cooperation. But if this investigation goes sideways, if it interferes with normal base operations, or if it creates any kind of political problems, you're on your own. Understood. Mitchell stepped forward. There's one more thing, Colonel. Yesterday's incident may be connected to a broader pattern of security breaches at military installations across the Southeast. Similar thefts, similar levels of inside intelligence, similar operational patterns. Hayes turned around sharply. Why wasn't I briefed on this? Because until yesterday, we weren't sure the pattern was real. But Ms. Chin's encounter confirmed several details that suggest coordinated activity rather than random criminal behavior. Sarah processed this new information quickly. If Mitchell was telling the truth, then the Fort Braxton incident was part of something much larger than a single security breach. That would explain the sophisticated planning and inside intelligence, but it would also mean they were dealing with a criminal organization with significant resources and multiple sources within the military. How many other installations? She asked. 7 confirmed incidents in the past 6 months, all involving attempted theft of weapons or sensitive equipment, all showing evidence of inside intelligence, all involving recruited civilians with no apparent connection to each other or to military personnel. Success rate. Mitchell's expression darkened. 4 successful thefts, 3 failed attempts, including yesterday. Total losses include night vision equipment, advanced communications gear, body armor, and approximately 200 pounds of plastic explosives. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Someone was systematically stealing military equipment across multiple installations, using recruited civilians and inside intelligence to carry out sophisticated operations. What's the common thread? Sarah asked. There has to be something connecting these incidents. We're still analyzing the data, but all affected installations are involved in training or equipping units deploying to overseas combat zones. All have similar security protocols and weapon storage procedures, and all have experienced recent changes in civilian contractor personnel. Sarah felt a chill. Recent changes like new IT support contractors? Among other things, yes. Hayes returned to his desk and sat down heavily. So, you think this whole thing might be connected to contractor infiltration? It's one theory, Mitchell replied. But we need more information before we could draw any conclusions. What kind of timeline are we looking at? Hayes asked. The thefts appear to be accelerating in frequency. If the pattern holds, we can expect another attempt within the next 2 weeks, probably at an installation similar to Fort Braxton. Sarah stood up. Then, I'd better get started. The longer we wait, the more time they have to plan their next operation. Hayes nodded. What's your first move? I need to trace how those 3 men got their intelligence about yesterday's operation. Security cameras, communication intercepts, personnel records for anyone who had access to the information they possessed. You'll have full cooperation from my security staff. Actually, sir, I prefer to work independently for now. If there is a mole inside the base, involving too many people in the investigation could compromise operational security. Hayes looked skeptical. You want to investigate a potential security breach without involving base security? I want to investigate it without alerting anyone who might be involved in it. Once I have solid leads, we can bring in appropriate personnel. Mitchell stepped in. Colonel Hayes, I can provide Ms. Chun with analytical support through my office. We'll keep you informed of any significant developments. Hayes studied both of them for a moment. All right, but I want daily reports, and I want to know immediately if you uncover any evidence of criminal activity by military personnel." "Of course, sir." As they prepared to leave, Hayes called Sarah back. "Miss Chun, one more thing. Yesterday, you risked your life to protect Lieutenant Walsh and prevent the theft of military equipment. Regardless of your classified background, that was the action of a true soldier." "Thank you." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Outside Hayes' office, Mitchell walked with her toward the parking area. "So," she said quietly, 7 installations for successful thefts and a pattern of contractor infiltration. "How long have you been tracking this?" 3 months. But we only connected the dots after yesterday's incident confirmed the operational pattern. And you didn't think to warn me that I might be walking into the middle of an ongoing operation?" Mitchell stopped walking. "We didn't know Fort Braxton was a target until it happened. The selection criteria for these incidents appears random from the outside, but not from the inside. Someone's providing targeting intelligence, security protocols, and operational timing. Someone with access to information about multiple installations. That's why we need you to investigate from the bottom up. Official channels would take months to develop actionable intelligence, and by then, whoever's running this operation will have moved on to new targets." Sarah looked out across the base, watching soldiers go about their daily routines, unaware that someone among them might be selling their security to criminals. 2 weeks to identify a mole who's been operating undetected for at least 6 months, possibly longer, and who has access to information about multiple military installations. "You've done more with less." That was before I cared about keeping a low profile. Mitchell smiled. "I never thought I'd see the day when you complained about a mission being too easy. This isn't easy, it's impossible. But I'll do it anyway, because the alternative is letting whoever's behind this continue selling military weapons to people who will use them against American soldiers." "I was hoping you'd see it that way." As Mitchell walked away, Sarah remained standing in the parking area, mentally preparing for what she knew would be the most challenging investigation of her career. She had 2 weeks to uncover a conspiracy that had been months in the making, using resources that wouldn't officially exist if anyone asked about them later. But first, she had to go back to being a civilian IT contractor, fixing computers and maintaining networks while secretly hunting for a traitor among the very people she was supposed to be serving. Sarah spent the next 3 days playing her role perfectly, the quiet contractor who fixed computers and stayed out of everyone's way. But during those 3 days, she was also conducting the most sophisticated intelligence operation of her career. Her first breakthrough came from analyzing the security camera footage. The 3 intruders had approached the Armory during a 15-minute window when the guard rotation changed and the surveillance system conducted its daily backup routine. That timing required precise knowledge of both security protocols and system maintenance schedules. More importantly, someone had temporarily disabled 2 specific cameras along their approach route. Not enough to trigger alarms, but enough to create blind spots that allowed them to move undetected. The disabling had been done remotely, using administrative access credentials that belonged to the base's IT department. Sarah cross-referenced the access logs with personnel schedules and found that only 3 people had been logged into the system during the relevant time window. 2 were regular IT staff who'd been conducting routine maintenance on other systems. The third access came from a workstation in the base communications center. The communications center was run by Master Sergeant David Kellerman, a 20-year veteran with an exemplary service record and top-secret security clearance. On paper, he was exactly the kind of soldier the military wanted handling sensitive communications. But Sarah's instincts told her to dig deeper. She spent her lunch break in the base library, using her contractor access to research Kellerman's background. What she found was interesting. His financial record showed several large deposits over the past 6 months, deposits that were inconsistent with his military pay and had no obvious source. But financial irregularities weren't proof of criminal activity. She needed something more concrete. That evening, Sarah returned to the base after normal working hours, using her maintenance access to enter the communications center. The building was quiet, with only a skeleton crew monitoring overnight operations. She made her way to Kellerman's office, where she installed a small monitoring device on his computer that would record all his activities without being detected by standard security scans. The device was a piece of technology that officially didn't exist, designed by military intelligence specialists for exactly this kind of operation. It would capture every keystroke, every file access, and every network connection without leaving any trace of its presence. Over the next 2 days, Sarah monitored Kellerman's activities while continuing her regular contractor duties. What she discovered confirmed her worst suspicions. Kellerman was systematically accessing classified information about weapon transfers, security protocols, and personnel schedules, then transmitting that information to external contacts using encrypted communications channels. But the real shock came when she traced his external contacts and discovered he was part of a much larger network. The operation wasn't just about stealing weapons from military bases. It was about building a comprehensive intelligence picture of American military capabilities and vulnerabilities. The stolen equipment was being sold to foreign intelligence services, and the security information was being used to identify additional targets for future operations. Sarah was looking at evidence of espionage on a scale that threatened national security. She immediately contacted Mitchell through their secure communication channel, requesting an emergency meeting. They met at a diner 20 miles from the base, where Sarah laid out everything she'd discovered. "This is bigger than we thought," Mitchell said after reviewing her evidence. "Kellerman isn't just a corrupt soldier selling weapons for personal profit. He's part of a foreign intelligence operation. The question is, how many others are involved? This kind of operation requires multiple assets across multiple installations." Mitchell pulled out a tablet and showed her classified intelligence reports. "We've been monitoring increased activity by several foreign intelligence services over the past year. Electronic surveillance, human intelligence operations, attempts to recruit American military personnel. But we hadn't connected it to the weapon thefts until now." Sarah studied the reports, recognizing operational patterns from her own experience with counterintelligence work. This is a systematic penetration operation. They're not just stealing weapons, they're mapping our entire military infrastructure. Which means Kellerman probably has contacts at the other affected installations. A network of assets feeding information to a central control. We need to identify the other assets before they realize Kellerman has been compromised. Once they know we're onto them, they'll disappear and start over somewhere else. Mitchell nodded grimly. "How long do we have?" "Not long. Kellerman's next scheduled transmission is tomorrow night. If he reports that the Fort Braxton operation failed because of unexpected resistance from a contractor with advanced combat training, whoever's running this operation will start asking uncomfortable questions. So we move tomorrow. We move tonight. I've traced Kellerman's communication schedule, and he's planning to meet with his handler in person tomorrow morning. If we can identify the handler, we could potentially roll up the entire network." Mitchell considered this. That's a lot of risk for uncertain gain. If the operation goes wrong, we could lose our only lead to the broader conspiracy. If we don't take the risk, we lose the lead anyway when they realize their security has been compromised. They spent the next hour planning the operation. Sarah would maintain surveillance on Kellerman, while Mitchell coordinated with federal law enforcement agencies to have resources in place for arrests. The goal was to identify and capture as many members of the spy network as possible before they could destroy evidence or disappear. Sarah returned to the base that evening and positioned herself where she could monitor Kellerman's movements without being detected. At 0200 hours, he left his quarters dressed in civilian clothes and drove off the base in his personal vehicle. Sarah followed at a distance, using techniques she'd learned during covert operations in hostile territory. Kellerman drove to a truck stop 30 miles from the base, where he sat in his car for 15 minutes before being approached by a man in a dark sedan. The meeting lasted only 5 minutes, during which Kellerman handed over a package and received what appeared to be an envelope in return. Sarah photographed both men and their vehicles, then followed the unknown contact when he left the truck stop. The contact led her to a motel on the outskirts of town, where she observed him entering a specific room. Using surveillance equipment from her old life, she was able to monitor his activities from a safe distance. What she discovered was a sophisticated intelligence operations center. The man was using encrypted satellite communications to report to handlers overseas, and his room contained detailed maps of American military installations, personnel files, and operational plans for future espionage activities. Sarah immediately contacted Mitchell with her location and observations. Within 2 hours, federal agents had surrounded the motel while Sarah maintained surveillance to ensure the suspect didn't escape or destroy evidence. The raid netted not just Kellerman's handler, but also a treasure trove of intelligence about the broader spy network. Computer files revealed the identities of assets at 6 other military installations, plans for future operations, and detailed assessments of American military capabilities that had been gathered over months of systematic espionage. Kellerman was arrested at his quarters on base, where agents found additional evidence of his espionage activities. The coordinated raids at other installations resulted in the arrest of 12 military personnel and civilians who'd been recruited as foreign intelligence assets. But the most significant discovery came when intelligence analysts examined the seized communications equipment. The spy network had been feeding information to a hostile foreign government that was using the intelligence to plan potential military operations against American interests. 3 days later, Sarah sat in Colonel Hayes' office once again, this time as the successful conclusion to an investigation that had uncovered one of the most significant espionage cases in recent military history. Ms. Chun, Hayes said, "What you've accomplished in less than a week is remarkable. You've identified and helped dismantle a spy network that was compromising American national security on multiple levels." "Thank you, sir. I just did what needed to be done. The question now is, what happens next? Your cover as a civilian contractor has obviously been blown. Every intelligence service in the world will know that Sarah Chun is more than a tech support specialist." Sarah had been thinking about this question for the past 3 days. Her quiet civilian life was definitely over, but that didn't necessarily mean she had to return to her old life of classified operations and unofficial missions. "Colonel Mitchell has offered me a position with a new counterintelligence unit that's being formed to address the growing threat of foreign espionage against military installations," she said. "It would be official, above-board work with proper oversight and legal authority." Hayes smiled. "And I'm going to take it. 8 months of civilian life taught me that I can't just walk away from serving my country. Yesterday's events reminded me that there are threats out there that require people with my particular skills to address. What about your concerns regarding corruption within our own ranks? The issues that caused you to leave in the first place?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. "What I've learned is that corruption exists at all levels of government and military service. But that doesn't mean the entire system is corrupt or that the solution is to walk away and let the corruption continue unchecked. So you're going back to the fight." "I'm going back to the fight, but on my own terms this time. Official oversight, legal authority, and a clear mission to protect American interests rather than private agendas." Hayes stood up and extended his hand. "Then, I wish you the best of luck. And I hope that if you ever need a reference for your counterintelligence work, you'll remember that you have friends at Fort Braxton." Sarah shook his hand. "Thank you, sir, for everything." As she left Hayes' office for the last time, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just 1 week. She'd gone from hiding her past to embracing her future, from running away from her skills to using them in service of her country once again. The irony wasn't lost on her that it had taken being cornered in an armory by 3 criminals for her to realize that some fights were worth having, and some skills were too important to waste on civilian life. Lieutenant Walsh was waiting for her in the parking lot, her ankle finally healed enough for her to return to duty. "I heard about your new assignment," Walsh said. "Counterintelligence sounds exciting. It has its moments. How are you doing? Any lasting effects from the incident?" "Just a new appreciation for the importance of good security protocols, and a lot of respect for civilian contractors who turn out to be more than they seem." Sarah smiled. "Not all of us have exciting backgrounds. Most contractors really are just people who fix computers for a living. But some of them are former Delta Force operators who know 47 different ways to kill people with office supplies. 48, actually. I learned a new one last week. They both laughed, and Sarah realized that despite everything that had happened, she was looking forward to her new assignment. For the first time in 8 months, she was going to be able to use her skills and training in service of something she believed in, without having to hide who she really was. As she drove away from Fort Braxton for the last time as a civilian contractor, Sarah Chun began planning her first official counterintelligence operation. There were more spy networks out there, more threats to American security, and more criminals who underestimated the determination of people trained to defend their country. She was ready to get back to work.